You're listening to After Images, a podcast for cinephiles that takes a deep dive into moving images. Each episode features a special guest who is invited to explore a film of their choice. After Images is hosted by film writers Frank Bouleg and Marisa C. Hayes. On today's episode of After Images podcast, we are delighted to welcome author Jen Fawkes for a discussion of Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger's 1948 film, The Red Shoes. Drawing on Hans Christian Andersen's fairytale of the same name, the narrative follows aspiring ballerina Victoria Page, played by real-life dancer Moira Shearer, in her first screen appearance. Shearer portrays a rising star at the Ballet Lermontov, where her character must choose between an ascending career and her love for Julien, a composer who works for the same ballet troupe. Peppered with additional performers of dance stardom, the film's 17-minute ballet sequence is recognized as a milestone in film history for the ways in which the choreography and cinematography are intertwined creatively. Accumulating numerous accolades since the time of its release up to the present, including Academy Award nominations and a place on the Best Films of All Time list, The Red Shoes is a marvel of psychological drama, horror, romance, and of course, music and dance, all wrapped in Technicolor wonder.
Our guest, Jen Fawkes, is the author of Mannequin and Wife, a Shirley Jackson Award nominee and Forward Indies gold medalist, and Tells the Devil Told Me, a World Fantasy Award finalist, and Large-Hearted Boys' Favorite Story Collection of 2021. Her fiction won the 2021 Porter Fund Literary Prize and has appeared in One Story, Lit Hub, the Iowa Review, Swamp Pink, and others. A two-time finalist for the Calvino Prize in Fabulous Fiction, Fawkes lives in Little Rock, Arkansas. Her debut novel, Daughters of Chaos, called Ferociously Radiantly Compelling by Kelly Link, and a dazzling synthesis of history, myth, and sheer invention by Charles Yu, has just been published by Abrams.
Welcome, Jen Fawkes, to After Images podcast. Thank you so much for being with us today. We're delighted that you chose to discuss Powell and Pressburger's 1948 film, The Red Shoes. When we start the podcast, we usually like to begin with the question, why did you choose this film? What does it mean to you?
Thank you so much, Marisa and Frank. It's wonderful to be here. I'm thrilled to be here to discuss potentially my favorite movie, definitely my first favorite movie with you all. So The Red Shoes was my father's very favorite film. My father, his mother was a dancer, and she taught dance throughout his life. And his parents were both they were very culturally aware. They were very much big supporters of the arts. They encouraged him to express himself. My father, he was a composer. He was a pianist and a composer. He was also a visual artist. He painted and drew. He also was an amateur magician and puppeteer. I mean, so he was like very, many of the elements of the Red Shoes, all of that kind of look at an artistic group that are all working together to achieve, greatness, was sort of like his milieu growing up. Like he was in this environment growing up. So my father, and when I was a child, I saw the film so often that when I was growing up that I thought it came on network television regularly, like The Wizard of Oz or White Christmas, or like a seasonal. I thought it was a seasonal thing, but it turns out that it was my father showing it to me over and over every time I would go visit him in the summers when I was a child, because my parents split up at a point. My sister and I would go visit him, and so I also started dancing when I was 5. I started taking ballet at 5. And that was my first ambition, was to be a dancer. And ballet being sort of, especially in the 20th century, the most pure, sort of the purest form of dance. That was, what I aspired to. Now, I am a rather Amazonian woman. I'm 5'8". I'm really big. Like, there's no way that I was ever going to be like a ballerina. But I am a good dancer. And so anyway, the movie not only did I want desperately to be Vicky Page, not only was I, the character of the dancer who is picked out and is and is sort of her own fairy tale within the movie, but the excitement of the world, the backstage world, I love it. Also, like my entire life now, many of my obsessions, both in my writing and just in my workaday life, when I watch this movie now, I'm like, oh, this came directly from the Red Shoes. Oh, this came directly from the Red Shoes. Like so much of what I am drawn to and what I love and what comes up in my own writing, I can now trace. Like every time I watch it, I'm like, wait a minute, did that also come from the Red Shoes? Like my insane like obsession with frame narratives and with triangles that aren't necessarily love triangles, but that are weird, emotional, other kinds of triangles and stuff like that. So yeah, and my mother also loved the movie. Like the way every time my mother said the Red Shoes, she said it like Lermontov says it in the very last scene when he's like, Victoria Page, cannot appear tonight. And he says, we're going to perform the Red Shoes anyway. When my mom always said it that way, because my mom was very funny and she was a crazy lady too. But anyway, so it's like I may have seen this movie more than any other on earth, yeah, so it's foundational for me in a lot of different ways, if that's enough.
So interesting to hear you describe this inspiration, because I feel like whether people went on to become professional dancers or not, you just have so many dozens of testimonies that talk about how inspiring the film was, and in particular, how growing up it inspired a lot of young women to turn to dance. And Suzanne Farrell, the famous ballerina with New York City Ballet, once said that she saw the film on television as a child growing up in the 40s and the 50s, and that there was a moment in the film, after the Red Shoes have come off in the ballet sequence, where Leonide Massine, the shoemaker, holds out the shoes again as if to say, who wants them? And she always says, I'll take them, I'll take them. And I'm wondering, because of that desire to possess the red shoes, how do you reconcile that with the horrific aspects of the film and the more kind of gruesome quality of Vicky Page's death and what the red shoes traditionally represent in the Andersen fairy tale?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I guess I've always been, and I don't know, I guess I've always been drawn to sort of the darker, and I don't know how much of this is, it's a direct, both of my parents, like, again, I was raised by my mom pretty much single-handedly. We stopped seeing my dad when I was about 11 or 12, but they both wanted to be writers. Like they both wrote. My parents, after they got divorced, they decided they were going to be an ex-husband and ex-wife writing team. And they worked on books together, like genre books. Like he was writing thrillers. And I discovered all this after my dad's, this is all way too much information, but I discovered all this after my dad's death when I went, because we had been estranged for many years, but I went to settle his estate and I found these manuscripts, like these boxes of manuscripts and these letters that he had written to publishers, like about he and my mom and like how they were this ex-husband and ex-wife writing team. So I'd say like my mother was a voracious reader and she gave me wildly inappropriate books to read when I was way too young. So I always was, I was not shielded from any of the sort of darker aspects of life. And I don't know how much of that is like both in terms of like our financial situation, right? And like that kind of thing. And also, and then in terms of like just generally being alive, I'm, reading books. I'm like, Mom, what is angel dust? She's like, well, it's a drug. It's also known as PCP, and I'm like 8 or 7. And she's, and so, I guess I've always been drawn to, not so much horror, but like mystery and, there are definitely aspects of the horrible. But, and then at the same time, one of my favorite books growing up was Italo Calvino's Italian folk tales. And I read folk tales and fairy tales, like they are a huge influence on my work. So the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, and I actually reread it, before this, because I was like, it's been a long time since I've taken a look at some of this stuff. But when I was a child, I didn't think about, right. And it is funny to think now about when I was, say, 8 years old and I watched this movie and I was like, Vicky Page, I want to be her. And then what ends up happening to her. I'm sure that at the time I must have asked my parent, I must have been like, this is, but I don't know. I don't know why I was just, I've always been more interested in sort of the dark underside of things, I would say, in a way that maybe a lot of young girls aren't. I was but the fact that it inspired so many young girls to dance, this movie, and this movie, it did show, I think that one of the things about this movie is it shows more of like the work that goes into performance than probably any movie had before, and the kind of how much you really have to sacrifice to do this, to give people this gift of art performance. And now subsequently, like I also watched Black Swan because I hadn't watched that since it came out. And I was just like, let me watch that again, because I remember enjoying it, and I saw it when it came out in theater, but I hadn't revisited it. It seems like, today we're much more like getting into the nitty gritty of how really like the real pain, like the physical pain and the actual, but I think that the Red Shoes, it gave this more realistic look at performance, and the fact that there were all these people who make up. I mean, I love the way that you see so much of the core and of the group, the dancing troupe, and how you see the people who are actually doing it. Like there's one person who's the star, yes, but there are like legions of dozens of people who are handling everything else. So I think but I've wandered way away from your question, which was about like the gore.
Well, there's so much to dig into.
yeah, there's such. I mean, I don't know. I guess I was never like someone who had like I'm gonna get married and have a life and be normal. That was never ever even a remote possibility for me. So I don't know how much of it was that both my parents were super weird and gave me it gave me ideas that other kids probably weren't exposed to, like put that stuff into my head, and how much of it was like my personal, me being just a weirdo. Because like, for instance, my sister, who we grew up in the same situation, she was not interested in the arts or in dance. Well, she did visual art, but she wasn't interested in these things in the way that I was, So.
But, it's interesting to put the film in perspective with the use of traditional fairy tales, which are, usually very dark, and they can become very gruesome. But at the same time, they have some sort of a message for the children, which is to stay on the path, basically, and not to leave it to go in the forest where the wolves are. What is, according to you, the message of the Red Shoes, if it is a transposition of the traditional fairy tale to the 1950s?
Well, I guess, and this is, if you say people like, and I'm sure you guys must know this, but people like Scorsese and Coppola, there's a way in which you could see it as saying art for art's sake is the only art worth making, trying to make, forget about it in any other context. That's like pure art, pure cinema, these ideas. This film, and Powell and Pressburger, because of this film, I am also like, Powell and Pressburger are really important for me. I know their whole catalog, like I love their films, and it all comes back. But I didn't start watching the other films of theirs until I was probably in my late 20s, early 30s, when I just went crazy. Like at around that age, I became just like an insane cinephile. And I knew a lot of movies from my childhood growing up with my parents, who showed me tons of, but I became just like obsessed with Powell and Pressburger. So the idea, and Michael Powell, I think, felt this, he really felt this way. And I think a lot of, Scorsese, other directors one of the reasons they were so inspired by this movie is because it is saying, what it is nakedly saying is art is more important than life. Mm-hmm. And that's that's a hard pill for many, many, many people to swallow. Not so much for someone like me, though, to swallow. But I think there's another lesson in the film that you can, if you are someone who needs more of a, something slightly less dark, I think that Lermontov's character is potentially the most lonely man, one of the saddest, most lonely characters who has ever been committed to film.
Hmm.
I mean, especially watching it now at my age, I see I see myself identifying with him more, which is strange. But I mean, he, as represented in the film, I feel like he's a character who is, for some reason, incapable of love. He can't love others the way that other people can love each other. And he's decided to replace that with his obsessive love of art, creating perfection, something to show the world that is, unlike anything anyone else has ever done. He hasn't replaced love with his ambition. And I think in that way, and even when the film ends, I believe that there's a shot of him alone in his box. I think, I know that he's out on the stage, and then it might come right before that. But I think that these shots of him, that there are a lot of shots of him alone that really reinforce. And so I think there's a way in which you could take away that, Vicky and Julian, they lost, but they loved. They found the thing that is it for all humans. What we all need is someone to love us and to be able to love someone else and exchange that feeling. And that Lermontov he's incapable of it. And so for me, kind of, there's a way you could read it as, being sort of, he's the loser in the end, even though he's going to continue to be a successful impresario and run this company and, discover more dancers, talented young people and whatnot. There's a way in which I think Vicky and Julian are the actual winners of the movie. And, I think they're painted that way, in a lot of instances in the film. When they get together, I mean, the scene where they're in, is it Monte Carlo, when they're in the carriage, where the driver is asleep, that whole sequence, and then she decides to go with him. They get this very long, joyous, pretty fairly, heartfelt. Whereas Lermontov, I mean, whenever he's alone, it's he's angry. He's, there's the punching the mirror scene. And so I think that's a way that you could sort of say, hey, this movie is not necessarily saying kill yourself for art.
I don't know. I think it's interesting because the moment when they are the most happy is when they are drifting together, because the person who is driving the cart is asleep. Whereas when they have a goal, when they are really focused on something, this happiness tends to disappear, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's what's in, I mean, I guess this is obvious, but the one of the things that struck me as I was watching the movie this time too is the fairy tale within the fairy tale within. So I'm like frame tales and stories within stories. It's just how I work. Like I work that way. It just seemed to come to me naturally when I started trying to write and figuring out how to present stories to readers. And I think so much of that comes from this kind of tale, growing up when frames, because I mean, frames are so useful. I love work that acknowledges its own artifice and acknowledges that it's something that's made. And I think that's one of the reasons The Red Shoes for me is it's mind blowing, because it does so many inversions, and it goes inside the story and then inside the story and then inside the story. It does that so many times. It's very complex. Like it's an incredibly, complex film. But yeah, I think, Julian and even though I guess running time wise, their romance, it doesn't take up all that much like real estate, right? In terms of like the length of the film. It's so, and what you said about the drifting carriage, I think that's exactly right. I think, both of them are being directed, by, the whole time, that the entire time that they're both ambitious, talented people, they're both being directed by this one person. And then when they manage to get away from him and they're allowed to just drift and not that's when they're really able to find each other, be themselves, be who they truly are under the layers of artifice, together. And then also the scene, there's the scene where they're where Julian gets up in the middle of the night and goes to play, and she looks at her shoes, and she clearly, she is torn. I mean, this woman is, I really think Maura Shearer's performance, like, and, she was, I mean, you guys know, I mean, of course, she was untrained, she was a dancer who really, really wasn't sure about doing the movie, but I always, and to this day, I feel like her performance is very nuanced and very, really well done. That kind of, the being torn, the way that she portrays, so being torn between life and art, is incredibly skillful. But yeah, it's definitely the time when they're drifting, and that whole, and Julie, she tries to wake up the driver, and Julian doesn't let her, and he's like, let's just continue to drift. But
and you mentioned these different stories within stories and the framing, and here I'm thinking about this revolutionary ballet sequence, a 17-minute long ballet within the film that references the original fairy tale, as well as what's happening with the characters in the film. So you've got all those layers kind of simultaneously unfolding. And I think that it really ushered in an era of movie musical dance sequences that really took to a more dreamlike, not necessarily escapist, but a more fantasy way of approaching what was happening inside the character's psyche. And I'm just wondering, as a child who watched a lot of films, what did you think of the ballet sequence? And then going forward, did you appreciate other ballet sequences and classic movie musicals?
Yeah. As a child, it's hard for me to remember exactly, but I do know as a child, because I was so interested in dance, that I absolutely loved, I loved the ballet sequence. And, watching it as an adult, I can see, and I know that was at the time when it came out, I think it was kind of a big, stumbling, the producers were like, wait a minute, I don't know if this is, and they really didn't like get behind it when it first came out. But then, of course, I think someone started showing it in the States, and it, it like took off. But yeah, there's, I mean, the influence, on, Singing in the, on movie musicals in general, Singing in the Rain and American, I mean, I think that the people who made those, for like Gene Kelly, I think that they've referenced, right, the Red Shoes as a, so I think that, taking, first off, I'm going to say, because I would be mad if I didn't say this, even as a child, the costumes, the ballet, the modern, the women, how they had modern, like 1940s, like their costumes were modern, and they had toe shoes that were all dyed to match their costumes. And I still to this day, every time I watch it, I'm like, and then also in the funeral scene, all the women who are in the procession, they're on point in their black toe shoes, like walking in. I'm like, but so the look of the design of the ballet, it was so, and that was when ballet was, the 40s, 50s was when ballet was opening up and becoming, allowing the modern, sort of more modern, this is right at the time when all this was happening. And so, and I mean, Leonid Massine as the and I didn't know, I've been looking up everybody, like I knew some about the dancers, but not as much. But like Robert Helpman being Margot Fontaine's like main, one of her main partners, dancers, over the years. And I think I think Robert Helpman was the one who choreographed the ballet sequence in the Red Shoes. But yeah, I think that, there was and it's sort of it presage. There's a way in which I think that the fantastical, that fantastical break in the middle of the movie that gives us like a space of not necessarily reality, sort of surreality or unreality, sort of presages movies that were coming in like the 60s and 70s, in which, the sort of the movement of the, like, say, experimental films of the 60s, and like, what is, like, the only movie that's coming to my mind is Head, like the Monkeys movie, but like films made in the 60s that where, or even films that combine animation and real action, like Mr. Limpet, like The Incredible Mr. Limpet, or like Herbie, things, that's a little later, but I think that especially from filmmakers, Powell and Pressburger had done, obviously Stairway to Heaven. Like, I mean, they had gotten into the realm of the strange, but that extended break, I think, gave other filmmakers and people, not just filmmakers, probably, I mean, writers, gave other people creating art like the idea that we could take the space to explore the strange and braid it into the real, which is like that's pretty much my mode of writing is fabulism, or I mean some people say magical realism, but I think of that really as a Latin, as a term that's more for Latin, for Latin writers. But I think of what like Western Europe, sort of the Western or like American European, those of us who set those of us who put the unreal or the uncanny or the magical into the everyday. That's just my go-to mode of writing. And I wonder now how much of it, like really the genesis of it was this movie, for me. Looking at this movie, I'm like, this is like the genesis of everything I do in my work, so much of what I do. But I think that freedom to work in unreal ways. I mean, people have been working in the unreal. I mean, people were, I'm sure, working in the unreal before they were really working in the real in terms of representation, right? Because why would you represent reality? Like really early on, people, I guess potentially the first stories we made up were about the gods to explain what was happening. At that time, there wouldn't have been any point in like representing reality. But I like plenty of realism. I like anything that's like well done, but I've always been drawn to the uncanny, the magical, something that like slips and shifts into something that is not quite real. And I think that that dance sequence in this movie, I think, opened up a lot of doors for other people who came after to explore the strange and the dreamlike in their work,
But maybe. One could argue to a certain extent that it is real too. It is just another level of reality, isn't it? It's an expressionist, a real level of reality that goes along with the camera, that takes us to the back of the stage instead of staying in front of it, as if we are exploring the psyche of the character, but also this idea of pure art, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, So, no, it's real, right? You mean when it goes into the past the proscenium and into the story. Yeah, I guess, yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that's not another level of reality because I think it is absolutely. But for the audience, I guess, for the audience of the film, I think it was certainly a new phenomenon to see that being represented. And then it's also making me think of, the psychology, things like Hitchcock's, Spellbound. Is Spellbound the one with the dolly? Yes, yeah, absolutely. Because the ballet sequence is representing, several things at once. Like, as you said, it's representing the internal struggle of Vicky, the torn between these two, forces, love and dedication to art, while telling the story of the fairy tale, which is its own, reality. So yeah, lots of levels of reality there.
And you had mentioned the filmography of Powell and Pressburger and how much a fan you are of their entire oeuvre. And I was thinking a lot about how The Red Shoes was preceded by Black Narcissus, which is another favorite of mine. And I'm thinking about how a lot of times people compare ballerinas and the level of dedication required and the kind of cloistered life that a ballerina lives due to what her art form requires. It's often compared to nuns, and I've actually heard of unsuccessful ballerinas who turn to the church to become a nun. So I'm thinking about this kind of total dedication, total immersion in something that just kind of becomes your life and that really is your life. And I'm wondering how you relate to that as a writer.
Well, it's funny. I think I was determined not to become an artist of any kind for most of the time I was growing up, because I was really scared of it. It's pretty terrifying in a lot of ways. Maybe it's funny. Maybe the red shoes scared me for a long time, but I was very. I think that when I finally decided that I was going to try to write, I was 30. So I was like very late, because I didn't think I could do anything. And I was kind of in a place where I was at crossroads. Like, I mean, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And my mom, both my parents had always, and I was like, well, maybe I should try writing. So, I did become really obsessively insane with it for a long time. Like I started writing and I was like, this is phenomenal. I'm going to dedicate my life to this. And I pretty much just put everything else just by, no, I didn't, I worked, 10 hours a day and didn't eat and was just really, I mean, I got I've been very unhealthy with writing. So I think that making art is definitely quite easy to fall into the idea that this is really all that matters and that you can use this as a substitute for living your life. So that definitely is, I produced I started writing late, and then I got in, someone that I was working at a catering job with was like, there are advanced degrees in creative writing. I was like, what? What is this? And so then I looked into it, and I ended up going and getting an MFA. And then I further went on and got a PhD in English literature and creative writing. And so for a large chunk of time, that's all I did. And before I went too. So this is like, a period of like 15 years, I think that the only way that I would have been able to make the work that I've made was by doing that, because I think, I know lots of other people who write, who have, most of them end up getting married, having children, having families, having to then, and there's a way in which I think I do not have children. I have 2 stepchildren. And my husband and I got married when I think I was 42 when we got married. And there's a way in which I think it is always going to change what you make. It's going to change what you make, the way that having children and having to worry about them and having to think about the world that's coming for them and things like that. I think but I think for someone like me, the kind of work that I've done, I couldn't have done it unless I had completely devoted myself to it. But I don't really know if doing it was in the end worth it. I mean, I don't really know if producing what I have produced was in the end important enough to sort of balance out the things that I've missed out on. Yeah, anyway.
You definitely don't have Lermontov's ego.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's funny. I was watching, I think it was Thelma Schoonmaker. There was like an interview with her. There were some extras on this. I have the Criterion DVD of The Red Shoes from like years ago that I bought years ago. And she was talking about, the woman who was interviewing her asked her why she thought there weren't more female directors, and she was like, well, she said, if I had something that I was desperate to say, I would direct a film. But I like doing what I do. I like editing the film and leaving it to, and thinking about figures like Scorsese and Lermontov, and thinking about the people who generally take that position, like the impresario, the person who's completely in charge and whose vision it is that we're all realizing. It's very difficult, I would say, for most women to get into a space where you could even imagine that you like deserve that or could handle that. I mean, for many women, I would say, because it's there's a kind of like, I don't know, even though like my generation, we were told that, oh, we're post, Mary Tyler Moore was on television. She was single. So like, we're fine with gender. There's no more gender problems. This is what we were told. We were like, oh, okay. But in fact, it would be a completely different move for a woman to take that kind of role. And to this day, women are slammed, and it's just in a public way, it's almost impossible for a woman to take that kind of role.
I'd like to come back to the questions linked to feminism in just a second, but I was wondering, following what you described as your need to write so intensely, if your computer is red.
If my computer's red. No, but it should be. It probably should be. And I don't know if I own any red shoes right now. But I've had lots of red shoes in my life. Yes.
But more seriously, the question of feminism, I think, is very interesting in relationship with this film in particular, and with the work of Michael Powell, globally speaking, because I can think of, right at the top of my head, I can think of I Know What I'm Doing, Black Narcissus, Where I'm Going, sorry, this film, which all have very strong central female characters, which was by far not the majority at the time when those films were shot. So how do you feel about his relationship to women and to the chances he was giving them?
Yeah, and I just watched Gone to Earth, which is like one of like two, maybe three that I haven't seen, but I just recently watched that. It is, and I loved it. I thought it was really great. I thought Jen did a great job. And that's another movie with a very strong and very unusual, outside society, someone who lives outside, sort of pretty much outside human, like normal sort of circles, who's the central character. Yes, I think Michael Powell, I think that he was smart. I think that this was a smart move on his part. I think that he saw an opportunity for, because probably even at this time, I would imagine that even at this time, women make up a huge part of the audience for film today. Readers, I mean, they're women. Women are who read books. So, and from the beginning, they made up a large part of film audiences, I know, and probably, I would imagine, well, I don't know, I haven't really looked up the statistics or anything, but so I think Powell saw an opening for, bringing forth interest, like enigmatic, strong, female characters that people had not seen before. And I think he probably felt, right, that, like, not unlike Lermontov, that he was, that he felt, I think, probably pretty good about, like that. Like, he was like, this is great of me. Aren't I a kind patriarchal figure? And in ways, yes, in ways he did get, and I also watched Black Narcissus again recently. And oh, wow. I mean, Kathleen Byron, is that her name? The Sister Ruth, that performance, and also Deborah Carr. I mean, and I think that was the film that like launched Deborah Carr's career. I think could have made her a star. I think, right? And was he married to her? He married Deborah Carr.
Oh, I'm not sure about that, but you may be right. Yeah,
I think he was married to her. And I think the first film she did for him was Colonel Blimp, and I think that's right. And then anyway, but yes, he was, I think he was smart. He was canny. He saw an opening in, in the world of film, and he really exploited it like wildly. The original, and I'm sure you guys probably know this too, but Pressburger's, the original treatment that he did was for Alexander Korda, and it was based on the relationship between Nijinsky and Diaghilev. I don't know exactly how you say things, because I've never talked to anyone about things. I always just think what I think about them, but I don't really get to talk.
Well, that's what's so wonderful about this.
but so his original script was based on like the tension there, and how he kicked Nijinsky out when he got married, and everything. So I think, turning it, to a woman, having the, I think at that time, late 40s, like we were coming out of the wartime and going into, the films had been saying like, give your life for your country. And then we come to this, the Red Shoes being this, no, give your life to art. Kind of that started a whole I think that there's so many, not just films, but other, texts that follow that idea from there. When people are free to think about things other than rationing and, the war again, it was still happening in England to a great extent, I'm sure, even when the film came out. But yeah, so I think that Powell himself, and then it's interesting, a movie like Peeping Tom, but anyway, but yeah, so I think he was canny, he was smart, he knew what he was doing. And I do find his portrayals of women, and it's funny, I feel the same way about Bergman, which is like, because he was such not a great guy to the women in his life. I mean, you can't, it's like, yet for me, the women that Bergman put on film are some of, I'm like, I am astonished by how much what he portrays resonates with me as a woman. And I don't know if it's because it's a generational thing, because I'm a product of the 20th century. I just am, which is good. I like the 20th century. But I mean, there's a way in which everything that, that I was told or read or saw was like imbued with the notions of the 20th century, like men are ultimately in charge or whatnot, kind of this. So I find that there are these male filmmakers like Bergman, like Michael Powell, who, I mean, David Lean. I mean, there's so many who create female characters that I am like, wow, this is, how do you know so much about women?
Yeah.
But anyway,
I'm so glad that you said that, because I've been hearing a lot of criticism of the film and women who keep labeling the film problematic without necessarily really expounding on why that is. But I do think that, for one thing, they talk a lot about the body horror of ballet and the fact that this film may have been really instrumental in launching a kind of ballet Gothic aesthetic throughout the 20th century. And I think that's true. But at the same time, I think it would be a little reductive to say that it's only horrific, because for me, I really see Moira Shearer's character as someone who enjoys transcendent moments of art on stage. And a lot of people cite that, look, there's a close-up of her when she's dancing Swan Lake and Lermontov is in the audience, and there's a close-up and her face is really glaring as the Swan Queen. And this is mimicked in Black Swan. But I think that actually just previously, the way that her head is held high, she executes a difficult series of turns across stage. To me, it looks like she's been transported by her art. She's really in the zone, and she's enjoying one of those moments of the kind of mastery over your art form that people dream about. And so I don't see it as just something horrific. And I think that that goes along with the gender question as well, to say that one could actually have some agency through their art form. And I do think that she has strong moments where she tells people, but I want this, or I'm going to dance. She's making these decisions. I mean, her mother sort of arranges the initial meeting, doesn't she, with Lermontov? But after that, it's really Vicky Page who's calling the shots and who's asserting herself. So I'm really glad that you saw that as well in the film.
Well, I mean, and I absolutely, I mean, I am of a mind. I mean, I see things in context. I can't help it. I think we're losing the concept of context. It's sort of like we're losing it, right? I mean, young people can't understand what I mean. What students can't understand what I mean when I try to talk about context. And part of that is that we're losing a sense. We're just losing a sense of history. We as a species are losing interest in things that were thought of as like bedrock important, like history, knowing what people have done before. These things, young people don't think they're important. They think that, or a lot of young people, I don't mean to be like, but a lot of young people think that the only context they know is online. I mean, very young people, it's a world, there's a shift happening right now where, I only live in the physical world. It's the only place I'm capable of living. But like my stepchildren and their children, they will be mainly living in virtual worlds. I have, I am almost positive, I'm 99% sure. So, I mean, if Vicky Page wasn't a strong, independent woman, in this movie, if that character doesn't represent, she's doing what she wants to do and she makes the choices she wants to make. And I mean, in the end, the shoes taking her off, right? There's a way in which that final scene, but no, I mean, I would be, I have to disagree, but it's with people who think that the movie is harmful. But then again, things that are considered, most of the things that I love, or a lot of the things that I love, are considered harmful now. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It depends on, like, is art. It depends on what you're looking for, like why it is that you're watching art. If what you're watching The Red Shoes for is for it to tell you you're okay and everything's going to be okay, I don't know. You might not want to, because
Right.
that's just not the case in any reality. I mean, I think I would like for us to be more comfortable with the notion that we aren't okay, and that's okay, right? That
Sorry.
sorry.
To interrupt. Yes, and I think we tend to undervalue the ability of people to read things according to their own, through their own filters. We don't take, not everyone takes the same story the same way. We are able to analyze it and to decrypt it, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say that for me, Vicky, I mean, I am like, dance is a different. We're talking dance is something. Dance is something that, and I can see, because dance is something that it demands so much physically of your body, and this is like the difference. I think about this a lot because a lot of I'm really interested in actors and backstage life, like in general, and this movie may have been like sort of the genesis again of that too. But when I grew up, I did theater, and I was never like, I never had a starring role or any kind of speaking role. I was mostly a dancer because I could dance, so I was like one of the background people who was dancing and doing things, townspeople. But I have this real obsession with what the lives of people who spend their entire lives pretending to be other people are like what that does to you as a person. Like, I'm this one person, and I'm like all these characters that I have played. How much of them is like, are there bits of them in there? Who am I now? What am I? So the people who actually perform with their bodies and give in that way on stage, for me, it feels like a totally different, like it's a different kind of making art than me sitting alone with my computer. It's such a, like, you're really committing to, and it's, in a way, it's a perfect metaphor. Like, that this kind of art making is the perfect art making for The Red Shoes, because they're forced to just, it's every bit of you. You're going to live or die by this. Your entire body is involved, and it's I mean, dancers are incredibly strong. Like, how strong these people have to be just to do what they're doing. Like, I don't think that because, and that's not to say that like women wanting to be dancers hasn't led to things that weren't healthy, like eating disorders and like people being hurt and like women having ridiculous images of what they should look like and things like that. Absolutely. But that doesn't discount for me, the sheer beauty of the art form itself, and what it shows us what the human body can do. And if the people who are doing it want to be doing it, how can we say that it's, I don't know, that they shouldn't be, or that it's in some way harmful to them? Maybe it is harmful to them on one level, but on another level, it's fulfilling a need they have, right? So anyway.
Absolutely. And I feel like a lot of people are very dismissive of ballet for the reasons that you cited, but it's an art form that's over 300 years old. So
Yeah.
it's known different periods and different trends, and you can't reduce it to just, a few problems that unfortunately we have in probably every area of life.
Yeah.
But I just
Yeah.
love the way that the ballets in The Red Shoes are used. I just wanted to mention first
Yeah.
Swan Lake, of course, which is this trifecta of a woman who is caught between an older man who's imprisoned her in swan
Yeah.
form and her love interest. So obviously that's the Julian Lermontov and Vicky Page triangle. And then
Right.
we also see extracts from Giselle, which is a woman who's died of a broken heart, tragically. So
Yeah.
we've got all of those different frames that you mentioned, those layers upon layers of stories nestled in the film. And I think it's interesting that, coming back to the feminism topic, that those are two ballets where I think that the lead roles for women have a lot of agency. Of course, it's not perfect and it often happens in death, but nonetheless, those are very strong women who have made certain choices who have really asserted themselves and also lived with the consequences of those choices.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I remember I think I found a copy or so this big book of like the Royal Ballet. It's like an illustrated, it's like a big book, illustrated, beautiful. And all the ballets in the Red Shoes were also in this book, that Coppelia and, but yeah, even and I guess the fact that a lot of times it was in death, right? So what you said is interesting, because they are allowed agency even if sometimes it's not, it's in death. I think that at the time, when these ballets were conceived of, and potentially that was one of the ways, like that you could portray that, and is not portraying it, because that's not the best way to portray it, a better idea than portraying it in this way. I mean, I agree with you that I think those roles have incredible agency. I mean, in the ballet, the women are in the dancing, in the structure of ballet itself, women are the the female dancers are the feature. Not that there weren't some male dancers who became big stars and were everybody, let's watch them jump, but really most of the time in ballet the men were there to support and lift the women. The men are there to lift up the women in traditionally. So there's a way in which, even though these women are having to control their bodies in ways so that they can do the actual dancing, they are the focus of the dancing. So it's a very I mean, it's a thorny, complicated, right, relationship that I have with dance. I think that anybody, right, has with dance, but ultimately, and I don't know how much of it is that my father and his parents were such fans of the ballet, but I will never not think that it's beautiful to see these bodies doing what you think bodies couldn't necessarily do. To witness it is just it's joyous for me, and I think it's hopefully the people who are doing it are getting joy out of it too. So.
Yeah, let's hope.
But I think these ideas are very interesting. I'm currently writing a book about Hitchcock and Lynch and the way the two are connected. And a lot of people say that Hitchcock and Lynch too are problematic in their depiction of women. But I think it is very complex too. I mean, it is not always straightforward. And there is a lot that can be said to defend them, and as much that can be said against them on those questions. And I think that somehow relates with what you've been discussing about ballet. I mean, it's a complex world we live in, and it's all too easy to come up to a Manichaean understanding of reality.
Yeah. And I mean, with Hitchcock, I mean, I'm also a huge Hitchcock fan. My father also showed me all of Hitchcock's films. And before, my dad he showed me films on film before like VCRs existed, and before you could get videotapes of things. But he was and so Hitchcock, like I know Hitchcock, I know his movies so well. And and again, it's not that I don't see, to look at things out of context through the lens of today and say this is problematic is just something I'm never going to be able. I'm always going to push back against. I just can't help but push back against the idea that anybody, that just because something doesn't fit into what we think today is the way that I can't imagine turning a blind eye. I mean, we have the choice of either ignoring what has come before and suffering the consequences, right? I mean, it seems like this applies to life, history, film, philosophy, science. I mean, everything. We have the choice of ignoring what's come before and suffering the potential consequences, or engaging with what's come before, and keeping in mind that what is problematic to us today, like I can hold space for that in my mind. It's like, okay, that's problematic for today. I'm going to put that over here, but I'm still going to engage with this material because I think it's far more important for us to engage with what has happened previously than to ignore it. But I guess a lot of people probably disagree with that sentiment today.
Oh, I give you a hear.
It's tough. It's like a mind. It's in ways it's like a minefield to talk about things like making art today.
It is. It
In
really.
ways.
I just want to come back briefly to this notion of achievement in death that you've mentioned concerning women. And I'm thinking here of the end of The Red Shoes when she jumps under the train. How do you read the symbolism of the train? Because it comes back several times throughout the film, doesn't it?
Yes. So the train. So, and this is another. I did actually want to talk about this. I also love. For whatever reason, I love train. I've always been drawn to train travel, like movies set on trains. Love it. And just rewatching The Red Shoes the last couple times I watched it. And I mean, I knew this, but you've got so much right? You've got so much train foreshadowing. Not them coming in. When Julian and Vicky are standing looking out, and the train goes by, and it's right where she later. But then also the contained atmosphere or the contained environment setting of the train car, where she's trapped twice with Lermontov inside, or twice. The first time when she comes and asks, and says to please don't fire Julian, and he says, and she says, well, I'm going with him then. And then the last time when Lermontov comes to her and comes into her train. And so, there's a way in which I think that trains are a way in which you're both trapped and moving, which is, for me, I think that's one of the reasons that I'm so fascinated by them, because you are trapped. I mean, the same thing applies to a plane and a car. I also been talking about this with my graduate students this past semester. We read stories in which people are driving, several stories in which people are throughout the story are moving, and there's a certain kind of movement and a certain kind of character development that you can get to when people are trapped in a space together, and yet they're moving through the atmosphere, like through the setting environment, right? But they're trapped in a smaller space. So I think, in terms of like the times when Vicky and Lermontov are in the car together, I think there's a definite reading of she's trapped, the sort of trapped in the space, but choosing the train as the right? The train as the element of her death, I think is, I think it is escape. Like, the train can represent itself. It is escape. It's a way to get away. And it's also kind of a counterpoint. You could see it as a counterpoint to the drifting carriage scene, right? I think that coming back to the drifting carriage scene, that is the moment of that's the moment of truth in the movie. There's love, there's truth. This is a real feeling between these two young people, and that's this very brief. And it's slow, and they're drifting, and the music is nice. And then the counterpoint of that would be the train screaming in, as it does, to the station, and Vicky, and her choosing, right, whether, and that might be, I was trying to decide today, like, what is my favorite part of this movie, and I kept going, this part, oh no, this part, but that scene, the final scene, when she steps forward with her dresser, and then there's that shot of her face and it's like, and then the shoes start to move her backwards, her feet go backwards, you see the red shoes moving backwards, and then from that moment, if you want to interpret it as, from that moment, the shoes have the control, if you want to see it that way, and they take her, of course, down the spiral stairs, that shot of the spiral stairs, and then the question of, how much of, how much is she doing this? Are the shoes really doing this, or is this Vicky's choice? But I think, in those ways, that the train as this instrument of her undoing, it's really woven throughout the film, and is seeing it as a counterpoint to the carriage, I think is an interesting, potentially.
Yeah. Maybe we could talk about the color red. What is your relationship to the color red? It's so symbolic, and it means so many different things in different cultures. What does it mean to you?
Well, let's see. I do like red shoes. I do like red hair, you know, and again, I'm like, does my obsession with red hair come from, you know, so many viewings of this movie when I was little? But the daring, I mean, you know, her, first of all, also watching the ballet today, women never have their hair down. You cannot dance, you know, it's like dancing with your hair down. And the way they have her hair, it's pulled back in the top, you know, that she's got the top part pulled back. But the fact that the length is down, you know, I think so much of the look of it is about her hair. You know, I mean, I think Norma, like Moira Shearer, I'm not Norma Shearer, Moira Shearer, that hair, I always have loved red hair. I dyed my hair red for many years. Like I've had various, you know, colors of red hair. You know, one of the first pairs of one of the first pairs of shoes I picked out for myself when I was a tiny child was like a pair of red tennis shoes with a yellow lightning stripe on the side. And my mom was like, "Really? Those are the shoes you want?" You know, because those are pretty vivid. Like, you know, I'm like, "Nope, these are the shoes I want." So I am a fan of the color red, but of course, you know, it has, you know, the implications of blood, the implications of, you know, both harm or sort of gore, sort of, you know, and then also love, you know, it's also the heart, you know, love. But I mean, another thing about the red shoes that is just, I Technicolor, the I am such a sucker. And I'm like, is it the time I grew up in? But it's like the hyper reality of the color is just so intoxicating for me. I mean, I am just seduced by Technicolor film, like, automatically. And I think in particular, you know, in the red shoes, and there's red, you know, throughout, like little red touches, you know, throughout this movie. But I think that something that occurred to me when I was watching the red shoes this time is the Technicolor and the setting of the artistic troupe, who are a family who are working hard on a project together, and the way that they get emotional and they fight and they throw things and they, you know, they it's just such a, like, the hyper reality of kind of backstage life, the hyper reality of artists, you know, moving through the world, and then the hyper reality of Technicolor. I think all that is like building on top of, you know, I think all those elements give this movie, you know, elevate it in this way for me. In this sort of, there was this, like, an some people have referred to some kind of writing like David Foster Wallace as hyper reality, but that kind of, you know, I'm like, does anyone talk about hyper real in the writing world anymore? But it just occurred to me when I was watching the Red Shoes this time that vivid, intense hyper reality of the color, I think, ratchets up everything else, like, sort of in the movie, you know, the tensions that are there, and the, you know, and plays off of those wonderful, the backstage relationships and the very fiery people who are making these productions.
That's such a good point, because I was thinking a lot about her red hair and wondering about that, and thinking about the fact that, especially at that time in history, red hair was a lot less common than it is today, because it is such a popular choice for dyeing your hair. But we know real redheads are quite rare. The natural world. And thinking a lot about the fact that Maura Shearer had Scottish heritage, and that she had this very Celtic look with the kind of very pale white skin and the brilliant red hair. And I was thinking about the fact that at that time, I think that red hair was actually more often associated with the kind of femme fatale, kind of pinup girl look. Right. If it didn't have that sort of Celtic association. And then that led me to wonder, would an English team like Powell and Pressburger possibly be using this very Celtic look as a way to sort of tame the Irish pagan? If we go back to the original folklore and think about the red shoes as this kind of vanity cautionary tale, in terms of not being too brilliant with your color, not showing off. I was just wondering if the hair is an extension of that, or if I'm just reading too much into that.
No, it could be too. And, you know, he loved, I mean, Deborah Carr and Kathleen Byron in Black Narcissus. There's something about, you know, the red. I think that the red hair, he seemed to sort of gravitate to women with red hair. And I do think that one of the main reasons, I mean, that they wanted Moira Shearer, that they really they loved her hair. They loved that, because as you say, very much more rare. And it's such a incredibly vivid red. And they, as I was saying, they like make use of it by leaving her hair down in a ballet performance, which would, is unheard of, I think,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that is potentially, seeing that as like taming the unruly, as a sort of an unconscious part of that, I think could be.
Maybe. I mean, obviously, as you said, they really loved it because Maura Shearer comes back with pretty much the same hair.
Yes.
Tales of Hoffman in Peeping
Yeah.
Tom, etc. So
Yeah.
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 And I suppose you could argue that even when the red shoes are not on screen, they are there thanks to her hair. I mean,
Yeah.
they are
Absolutely.
omnipresent thanks to that. Mm.
So is above, so below.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, and the red shoes. I also love the parts in the ballet where Leonid Massine is carrying all the parts where the shoes are alone, kind of on their own, and he's carrying them as the shoemaker. And of course the moment when she jumps into them, that oh, and the Robert Helpman, the dance, the paper dance. I was like, I was trying to decide which of her costumes is my favorite, in the ballet. But I really can't choose. Like, there's a part of me that I love the way she looks at the end when she's like everything's tattered and dark, black, and the tights are torn. There's something about the way she looks at the very end of the ballet that I just love, but her costumes, I mean, throughout are just, I just, I love it. I love it. Sorry. But yes, the period ballet costumes of the women who are just like the townspeople in the ballet. Just ever since I was a kid, I've adored those. I've adored
As you said, the colors are so great. And I love this period in ballet on film because, as you mentioned, it's kind of the neoclassical period when they are modernizing, but they're also really taking advantage of the Technicolor. And it feels like the costumes and the choreography have just found this perfect synchronicity that, I don't know, for me as a kid growing up, it kind of screamed modernity, but within this very classical tradition that was just super appealing to me.
Yeah, I think that's too how, my dad would have seen, like my parents would have seen it too, or people of their generation too. They were like, my dad was like, this is new, this is new. This is revolutionary. You need to pay attention to this because, if and I'm like, but I don't, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. But he was he really wanted me to know like that, both my parents were really into the idea of me being like making things, being a creator in some way. And but he definitely, you're right. It's got this modern feeling contained within this classical framework. Absolutely, yeah.
And can you tell us about what you are currently creating?
Oh, I haven't gotten to work on this book in a long time, but I have a novel going and I'm about to hopefully get back into it. It's basically, it is set in a Kirkbride insane asylum that's been converted into condominiums. And it's a novel. It's two time settings. One is two time settings. And for this is like I'm using Hollywood is coming into this novel. I used Frances Farmer, the story of Frances Farmer, as kind of a jumping off point. But so there's two time frames. One is when the asylum is an asylum and a famous Hollywood film star is committed to the asylum, and that interior story is told through the journal of the head nurse, who's the head nurse who's running the asylum, and so then that's 1948, and then there's a current story, the current set about 2018, as I think where I'm going to set it. A film professor who is working on a book about the Hollywood star who disappeared. Well, the other part of this is that she and the head doctor disappeared from the insane asylum, and neither of them was ever seen or heard from again. So the current time protagonist is a female film professor who goes on sabbatical, and she stays in a condo that's in the converted Kirkbride Insane Asylum, and she's trying to like solve the mystery kind of what ultimately happened to this actress who disappeared from this asylum. So there's a lot of stuff about like women's mental health historically and how women have been treated, and then also about classic Hollywood and yeah. So the working title is Lady Maneater. So that's
ooh. And in the meantime, I believe we have Daughters of Chaos, which is coming out in July. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, this is my first novel, and it was inspired by the story of during the American Civil War. The city of Nashville attempted to exile their prostitutes. They rounded up the prostitutes, as many as they could, and put them on a riverboat and attempted to ship them off because they were blamed for the rampant spread of venereal disease amongst the soldiers. So it was the headquarters. Nashville was the headquarters of the Union Army's Western theater. So there were hundreds or tens of thousands of soldiers who flooded in, and so it was inspired by that. But it was also inspired by my book. It was also inspired by Lysistrata. There's a lot of Greek mythology in there. Yeah, so that's coming out in July.
I'm so excited to read it. I was so hoping to read it before the podcast, and then I realized when I looked online that it's not coming out until July.
Yeah. So
look forward to.
Thank you. I hope you enjoy it.
I'm sure I will.
Thank you very much for having been our guest today. Oh, one last question, the one we always end up the podcast with. Is there a question we haven't asked that we should have asked?
Let's see. I don't think so. I can't really think of anything that I don't. Wait, let me see. Let me consult my notes here. Oh, I did wonder about. We talked about trades. I did wonder about. Did Maura Shearer's? Did this end her dancing career? Pretty much. No.
No, it didn't, though. It's true that I think it distracted from it a bit. And I'm always fascinated by the fact that ballet critics are always quite harsh with her. They're always mentioning the fact that she's not actually a great dancer, which might be compensated by her acting skills. Though I have to say, as a lover of Gothic ballet horror on film, I much prefer Maura Shearer, a professionally trained dancer, to the actors who clearly haven't had any ballet training when they appear in films. So, I do think she continued on to dance in the UK and to tour internationally. And it's really interesting that she and so many of her dancer colleagues in the film had actually come from a background very similar to what's depicted in the film. I mean, the film is based on the Ballet Russe, which then became the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, the Diaghilev figure who had really kind of created that model for the impresario and the touring company and those really great interdisciplinary collaborations. So it's interesting that she really did come from such a background.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I wondered if I wondered if the movie had, if it had done kind of to her, because I thought that I read that she was really unsure about doing it because she kind of thought it might end her career as a professional dancer. And then I thought if it had, the sort of irony on top of irony, like the art imitating life or life imitating art. But I'm glad that she continued dancing. So yeah.
She was afraid that the movie would be like the train in the film.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just as a fun side fact, the other ballerina, the ballerina who's already established when we first start watching the film, I always do a graveyard dance tour of my favorite defunct ballet dancers with my students, and that was Ludmila Cherina, and I walk past her grave on a regular basis. She's really close to Nijinsky in the cemetery.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
I always think of the red shoes when I walk through the cemetery.
Yeah, I bet. Irina, was it Boyanskaya? Was that her
Yes,
name in the
exactly.
film?
Boyanskaya.
Boyanskaya.
Mhm.
Cool. Well, that's cool. And so you walk by where you live. It's close to where you are.
Yeah, it's in Paris. It's in Montmartre.
Okay. Wow, very nice. I've never been to France. Never
Oh,
been anywhere.
please come.
Yeah. Oh, I would love to. I hope to do some traveling in the next couple of years because I've never been anywhere. And I'm like, well, I think, you know, I'm someone who really desperately wants to see like all kinds of things, but I just haven't ever had the resources to do so. So,
Hmm.
or
Well,
the time.
opportunity to come. We'll be happy to show you around Paris.
Okay. That would be wonderful.
You
Okay.
can go visit Ludmila Cherina.
I would happily. Yes, I'd love to.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
it's been such a pleasure speaking with you, and we really hope that our listeners will read Mannequin and Wife, the wonderful collection of short stories that you wrote among your other books, and we are looking forward to Daughters of Chaos.
Okay. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. It was really wonderful to meet you guys and to talk about the red shoes.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a great
you. You too.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to After Images. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and follow After Images podcast on social media.